Before we get into the meat of it, just a little bit of context, and I think a useful mental model that hopefully will make it easier to do this exercise is something that I like to call the Foggy River. Okay. Starting a company, really doing anything, but certainly starting a company, I would say, is a lot like crossing the Foggy River. And this Foggy River has three basic elements. Okay. You've got where you are on one side of the riverbank. You've got where you want to be, right? This is on the other side. So imagine some elevated hill. You can see it up against the horizon. You can imagine this incredible thing that you're going to build on the other side, right? So that is, in business speak, that's your vision, right? That's the long-term result that you want to get to. And there are all kinds of visioning exercises. I'm sure you guys have heard the terms mission, vision. I think the easiest way to think about that is you have the long-term vision. It could be 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. It depends on the organization. It's where you want to get to. And then the direction that you're always oriented in is your mission. So the mission is infinite. It's why the company exists. It's really contingent upon your ability to do something that nobody else is able to do. It gives you energy. It's transcendent. There's always more stuff you could be doing when you have a strong mission, and it acts as, in some ways, like your compass. No matter where you are in the Foggy River, you can look at your mission and know, okay, that's where north is, right? Or that's the direction that I want to go in. And then the vision is that point on the other side you're trying to get to. Now, what's tricky about this is, on one hand, you look at it and you go, okay, that's pretty straightforward. We should be able to come up with a project plan where we break this down into concrete steps and then you execute and you get there. But that's not really how it works. That's not how reality works. I think one of the things that is really important to understand, especially when you're operating on the frontier, you're doing things that you've never done before, you're doing things that nobody's ever done before. And that's often, sometimes, or I would say always the case when you're working with technology, is that the future is not just unknown, it's actually unknowable. Okay? And the only way that you can figure out what the right next step is on the Foggy River is to go do things. It's to go run experiments, it's to disperse the fog, it's to generate information by taking action. And there's a process by which you take the best steps to get to the other side. And if you had done some kind of planning, come up with a 10-year plan 5 years ago, OpenAI would likely not have been a part of that. But to have fully committed to that and not be able to change would probably not be conducive to long-term success. So the question is then, how do you find this optimal balance between staying focused and continuing to move in the right direction, staying aligned, while also being able to be agile and flexible, adapt to how the environment changes, but also what you discover about your own capabilities and these insights that you generate over the course of, in the case of the objectives and the key results of the quarter, and then use that to accelerate faster to finally reach your vision. Right. So if you think about crossing this Foggy River, there is conceptually, if by the time you get to the end, you would look backward and it would seem inevitable, because there are these different steps. You think of these as like stepping stones, okay? There are these different steps that you've taken to get to your final destination. Retrospectively, that's how it looks. It seems like it couldn't have been any other way. But prospectively, the challenge is that there's not necessarily an obvious stepping stone to go to. There's this entire range of possible options at any given time that you could take. And just like you're trying to cross a river, you can't step out to two stones at the same time. And companies are the same way. I like to even think of companies, if you look at the root of the word corporation, it's corpus, which means body. If you're in a corporation, you're very much like a cell in a body. And we take this kind of unified action, even though we have all the specialization, our organs and everything are all moving together, but there's this one action that you're trying to take towards longer term outcomes. Corporation, same thing, just at a bigger scale. What we're going to do today is figure out what the next best stepping stone is to step onto and achieve consensus around it. And when I say consensus, it really means three things. Everybody feels like they understood the process. Everybody feels like they were heard and they can participate. And the third is you can live with the result. So at the end of the day, the CEO is going to decide what the objective and the key results are, surface lots of options, but it is ultimately up to you. So just put that caveat on it at the end, but everybody should be able to live with it. We know that's the stepping stone. We're going to take that step and keep moving forward. Now, through this process, on one hand, yes, you're making progress, but the progress in a way is almost secondary to the fact that you're dispersing the fog. That's more important. And this is somewhere where people tend to get confused about committed targets versus using this process, objectives and key results, where the progress is a consequence and it's something you want to aim for, but it's secondary to the learning. At the end of the quarter, what we'll do is we'll do a reflection. And this happens continuously over the course of the quarter, but certainly at the end, we'll look backward and take stock of all these things that were discovered along the way, which you can just call them insights, but it's instrumentally valuable information that you did not have before and hopefully nobody else has. So if you know something that nobody else knows, a secret of some kind about the way a certain process works, some unmet customer need, scientific breakthrough that allows you to create new technology, that profit margins are directly downstream of that. Your information edge is the source of the value that you can create and then capture in a market. And those can fit in two buckets. There's essentially things you knew you didn't know, where you run an experiment, you generate data, and you make sense of it, and then you either reject or fail to reject the hypothesis that you had. And then there are the things you didn't know you didn't know. And that ends up being the most valuable. It's a case where there's some serendipitous thing over which you had no control, but you just so happen to discover it. And at a smaller scale, it could be a relationship that you create. It could be some step 31 in a 60-step process per client where you're like, wow, that's a perfect fit for what we're able to do. They really value it. Let's unload all of our ammo on that. Something like that, right? Those serendipitous things, and those can only be discovered through this process of action, right? Running experiments on a weekly basis. There's a whole process of during the week how this works. Maybe we can cover that a little bit at the end. But the important point is just of all these different options, these different objectives and then the key results that you can select to focus on over the course of a quarter, there is one that is, from where everybody's sitting today, the best. Now, everyone probably has an idea of what that is currently, but the reason for everybody coming together versus just the CEO saying this is the goal is that everyone actually has a different map pre-existing in their head. And there are things that you can see, parts of the map that are illuminated or dark that other people on the team don't necessarily have. Part of the process here is to really uncover the truth as far as what people know about the environment, the internal capabilities of your company, some of the challenges, maybe customer unmet needs. Bring that to the surface and then figure out what the right place to focus is. Now, the hardest part about this whole thing, and there's no shortcut to doing this, it has to be new every single time, is there's an art to figuring out the trade-off between breadth and depth when it comes to selecting the stepping stone or the objective and key results. You can get more constrained and more focused, and you can go further, or you can keep your options open. If there's a lot of fog and a lot of uncertainty, be less constrained and have more degrees of freedom over the course of the quarter. And the trade-off there is more progress versus being a little bit more conservative and making sure you don't overshoot something or go in the wrong direction, right? Which obviously can happen. You have examples of multi-billion-dollar projects that end up going nowhere because there weren't enough degrees of freedom in place to remain flexible. Okay, you want to make a deep and narrow bet, ideally, and as you run this process and you disperse more fog, it becomes easier to figure these things out. But every single quarter, that trade-off is something you got to figure out. There's an art to it. I don't really have a good reason for this other than what I've seen in practice, which is that there seems to be something fundamental, I don't know if it's a human thing or whatever, where the periodicity of the quarter or the season is enough that you can make that outsized progress, and it's like attainable but ambitious at the same time. What I've seen happen is generally the curve looks like this as far as success. And so the first month, second month, first month you might be banging your head against the wall. The second month you're starting to figure things out, and then on the cusp of the second and third there's some breakthrough. And there are different reasons why this happens, but just to your point, it seems to work this way. If it's a year, maybe a little bit too long, week or a month, too short, can't get to the breakthrough. If you zoom in into that sort of top-down view of that, where you are right now, on one side of the riverbank. You zoom in, you think about it looking under a microscope, right? Like you see a cell or some tissue sample or something, and it's got all these different cells or organelles or whatever in it. The default state is what's on the left. That's the homeostatic state that organizations will go into. And then if things go right, it ends up looking like this. And what's nice about this is you end up having your cake and eating it too, in the sense that everyone's actually, I wouldn't say working less, like you're working the same amount, but you're going to generate results that are more significant because everyone's in coordination, in harmony, and just qualitatively, it feels better. You're in that sort of like collective flow state, moving in the same direction. You're certainly not working against each other. Absolute worst case scenario, this happens to big corporations all the time just because coordination is hard, but you might have teams that are actually pulling the organization in completely different directions. It's expensive, counterproductive, don't want that, right? But if you have alignment, everyone's kind of on the same page, things tend to work pretty well.